Christmas party to go to soon. So, shall we get busy?
Yep.
All right. We all know the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Board Authority to optimize transportation services and development in our region. Welcome to our guests out in the public. If you have any comments, feel free to bring them up. With that, a quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. Roll call. Commissioner Eriks.
Here.
Commissioner Baki's here. Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Lalonde.
Here.
Commissioner Hoban.
Yes.
Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
All right, let's start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent. The consent agenda, as always, is made up of routine items that require board action but not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote by any member. Today's consent agenda item is approval of board meeting minutes from November 29, 22. Would anybody like to have more discussion on the agenda from last month? All right. With none of that, can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as stated?
I'll make the motion.
A second?
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All in favor of accepting the consent agenda as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Nay. Motion passes. On to our warehouse agenda. You sure you don't want to have any other updates or discussion?
Yeah, we certainly can. If you didn't notice, we did get a new board member appointed to fill the one vacancy on the board. Justin Houston is or is it Jordan? Sorry, Jordan. I keep doing that. Jordan Husted was appointed by the city last week at the meeting. We still have one open position. They said at the meeting they hadn't received any applications. And so as of yet, I still don't know if they have any applications. But certainly at the next meeting in January, we'll have at least one new board member. I've already been in touch with him and sent him a few updates and information, background, last month's agenda, that kind of thing, so we can kind of see where we are in the business cycle. And then we'll be scheduling after the first of the year. We've got an appointment to schedule a time to have him come in and take a tour and learn a bit more about the operation before the first meeting. So we'll get him up to speed, and then hopefully in that interim we'll have somebody new appointed too, so we'll see about that. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out, at your desk, you have a copy of the current reserve status. We'll start presenting this monthly because we are drawing heavily on reserves now as we intended to. And so what's happened in the last 2 years, normally we carry reserves at about $2 million. The official, unofficial board policy is about 1.8, 1.6, about 6 months of O&M, depending on where our budget is. We've, in the last 2 years, have been submitting our O&M expenses to ARPA, CARISA, and I'm missing one in there, ARPA, CARISA, CARES, in order to get reimbursed for those expenses. The FAA had told us last year at the regional meeting that the criteria for getting projects approved was kind of difficult to navigate, and so an alternative was to submit your O&M expenses, which basically don't need to be approved, and then we get the money, and then we take the money we would normally spend on O&M expenses and we use that for projects, and that was their kind of workaround for being able to do projects with this money, which seems a little bit silly to me, but nonetheless, that's what we've done. So we've been submitting O&M expenses now for about 2 years, and we've built a war chest of, at one point, about $9.5 million for the terminal renovation downstairs, the condo project, the warehouse condo project, and a couple other out-of-pocket cash projects that we have coming up. Signage, I think signage is coming. Signage is coming out of that. So we have.
That's bill money.
That's actually bill money. So yeah, it's mainly the downstairs project was $7.5 million, and then we knew we were going to be on the negative cash flow side on the warehouses. So as of today, and I'd say on the spend side, Steve, what would you say we are on the spend side through the terminal project? Do you think we're even at 20% right now?
No, we're only like 1.8 right now, 1.6.
Yeah. The 1.6 total spending. So 1.6 we've already spent out of the $7.5 million program. So we still have quite a ways to go. And so Our cash flow month to month is still pretty good because we have a lot of kind of cash flow positive things I talked about last month. Passenger facility charges, for example. We still have $2 million to collect on the bonds that we retired at the beginning of COVID. So every month we get about $45,000 to $60,000 on PFCs that we can basically put right into the O&M account because that expense side has already been expended. So that money for another about $1.5 million, a little more than that, $1.75 million, will continue to trickle in every month. And then we have the parking revenue is up significantly, and the new FedEx lease is much more profitable for us than the old one was because we don't have any debt service. We're actually selling them the building, so every month that comes directly in on O&M. So the cash flow is looking pretty good. I think we're in good shape, but every month we want to present this just to kind of give a check of where we are cash flow wise. At the end of November, we were right at 8.7 roughly.
John, are we making money on that? The operating account? Do we have a sweep account so we're at least getting overnight on that? Because interest rates are up now, obviously,
right.
And you got $5 or $6 million. I understand we're investing in the others, and that's fine. That's really our core
right.
reserves. But you can get overnight if we have. You know what a sweep account is, and it offsets with bank fees.
Right.
So you can say, okay, you don't charge us fees, and that was always kind of a wash before when interest rates were basically
right.
zero.
Right, and that's what we just did is we RFP'd banking services last year in order to reduce fees because of we were getting nickeled and dimed a little bit, and so that is one thing we probably need to talk to the bank bank about is would it make sense to put some of that into an overnight sweep so we can generate
it just sweeps your account. So
right.
if you've got $1 million check that hasn't cleared, you still get that $1 million tonight and get interest on it.
Right.
So but again, there's that rate and then the bank fee. So it's a good. It's pretty easy to put a pencil to it to find out, happy medium. But it's real money now, especially with that kind of reserves and cash flow.
And now that STIP's actually making money again too, because that's a state-run investment program that's a laddered bunch of T-bills, and so they have some long maturities, short maturities. But they try to ladder that, and then you have a little bit less free availability of funds, but it's gotten very short now, where we can actually access funds within a couple of days. We probably need to look at taking more of that, even half of that, what we've got in bank, and stick it in STIP, and then draw on it as we know that we've got expenditures coming.
You could look at the next 6 months and do worst case scenario needed for cash flow, and I think you'd probably reallocate some of that.
Yeah, for a long time the Treasury function really didn't make any difference, but we're in a period now where it can make some. So that is something we probably need to spend some time looking at again and trying to tailor it some. We've turned over a couple CDs. We had a couple longer term investments, about $500,000 sitting in CDs, and so we're getting some better yield on those now, 4% on the one, and we may actually look to put a little bit more in there because we're trying to hold static $1.5 million at least. So there's another $1 million we could probably lock away long term in something like a CD if we had to forfeit the interest to get it. Okay, at least we can get it. So I think that's probably another thing we want to do too is First Interstate just sent us some new CD yields that they got in the last couple of weeks with the rate increases again. And so we may take advantage of a couple of those and lock away some more money there. Nice thing about that is if we do it right, we could maybe have 2 or 3 more notes that would be FDIC insured also, because we could be under the federal requirement on that. So that's kind of a nice way to do it, to set up a couple smaller CDs to get another $1 million put away. Yeah, so those are things we definitely need to do. Yep.
That was worth the meeting right there.
Paid for the Christmas party.
Make some more interest. I think we need to have a party tonight.
So maybe next month we'll get an update on that.
Yeah,
where we're at and what we're doing. And
absolutely.
changes. Since we're going to do this every month, you can we'll see what's going on. And
for sure.
Thank you.
Any update on the TIF meeting?
Yeah, I can talk about that too. I was going to talk about in the actual item, but so last week we did go before the the city, and we got unanimously approved to increase the TIF amount from the 770 that we initially budgeted back in 19 to 1.1 million. As I explained at the meeting, it's not all escalation. There was actually some change in the project design. When we had the engineer's estimate at 770, we thought that we could have water and sewer lines that were much smaller. In fact, we thought we could actually access the one water line that was on that side of the road. But when the city put that in the model, which includes all the pressures and everything that we don't really have access to, it spit out we needed much larger sewer and water. So we had to cross the road. Because we had to cross the road with the sewer already, and the sewer line got twice as big, we only had about 25,000 for boring underneath the road, and it turned out we spent 90,000 because we had to bore in a whole additional line, and the line we thought we were going to have to bore was much larger, so we needed a bigger bore. So we ended up quite a bit higher on that. The water and sewer lines themselves were much bigger. The pipe was much more expensive because it was literally twice as big, and coming into that development, so that was more expensive. And then when we got into the ground, the as-built weren't exactly correct as to where the utilities were. That's not uncommon up here because we have ribbons of very hard rock, and so the builders oftentimes encounter conditions in the field and they'll vary the location from the plan set to avoid some of those ribbons. You may remember Love's actually dynamited out some of their utilities.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's how hard the rock is. It'll ruin any piece of equipment they put in there. So, oftentimes we find the lines are off, and in this case, it was off, and they had to lower the sewer line to get it away from the water line. The city requires 10 feet of separation between the lines, and so we ended up with that. Then we had to have a couple valves that weren't planned either. So about, I would say, easily half of that cost was just change in design from plan design to construction design. And then the rest of it was escalation because we hit that big curve with estimates in 19 and then hitting construction in 22, basically pricing. It was much higher. And so they did approve it, so we'll receive 1.1 million, essentially all of our cost of the infrastructure and the roadway that's already built. We have 2 entrances out there. The fire department wanted 2 entrances, so we have 2 entrances and a road connecting them, which is good because the next phase of development won't need another entrance. It's already in. So we have that in place, and the city will reimburse 1.1 million. Last I talked to them, they thought they had about 300,000 on hand in that TIF district. Of course, they just did a tax collection in November. So one of the things Shailene's going to be working on here soon is contacting to find out how much money is in there now and make sure everyone is paying in. We found when we audited that TIF last year that the I-State payments weren't going into the TIF for some reason. No one's really sure why that was. They were going directly to the city and not getting captured in the TIF. So we alerted the state to that. We hope that this will be the first collection that's actually corrected. And so going forward, we should have a good feeling. Pretty much all the development that's going to be in that TIF district is now in that TIF district that we can bond on. So we should know after the November payments kind of what our bonding capacity is. With 300,000 on hand and 1.1 million to reimburse, we only need to bond 800,000 or something in that ballpark. So we think there's plenty of money in there because it seems to be generating enough to bond quite a bit more than that. But we should know by February, March what the bonding capacity is, and then the city plans to begin the bonding process in spring, which should give us enough time to have those bonds done before it expires in October. The bonds have to be sold, but I'm sure in this environment, a 6 or 7%, bond probably, with enough cash flow that it's going to generate plenty of money and more development coming on that will pay into that TIF. That is probably going to be a pretty lucrative bond. I would think an insurance company or somebody would snap that right up. And the payback is probably less than 10 years because it generates that much cash flow. So a nice shorter term, higher yield. I mean, it should be a pretty decent market for that, I would think. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with the city.
And just real quick before we get into that, now the winter has officially arrived. How's our equipment holding up, and with the construction going on underneath, do we have any more worry about any more broken pipes with the
No,
low
we've
zero
been doing pretty good on piping under there. They've been doing a good job keeping that insulated. what they open up, but, so that's been going fine. And all of our snow equipment's holding up well.
We've been riding herd on them to try and get that back enclosed. They've got most of the wall constructed now, and the doors are apparently here. We heard that today. We actually were in contact with the door supplier, and they said that they were here. So, we really need to get that back enclosed as soon as possible. So we'll continue to ride on the contractor about that. We need the space to be heated down there so we can start to move the equipment away from the building, so that they can open up more areas to construct. And kind of on that front, we had a good call with TSA yesterday. I think to talk about the baggage design. It looks like some of what Bozeman has down there for used belts, they were only in service for I think less than 10 years, right? May work for us on our actually TSA belts in the back. So we might be able to grab a couple of sticks of belt, and then once the bags come back through the wall, we would have some used belts that would take them into the machines. We may simplify that design pretty significantly now that we've got kind of an idea of what TSA wants. It looks like we might be able to actually reduce the scope of the project a little bit, not build some of the walls back there, make it a little bit easier for the airlines to access the bags. So we're just working on that now to try and get a design together for the actual bag system. Good news is, we get to take advantage of maybe some of those bag belts, so that'll save us some money.
Excellent. Anything else? All right, let's get into our first and only item, the warehouse condo cost revision.
Yeah, as the memo says, Dick Anderson has completed all of the sub pricing with their subs for the project. Over the last 6 months, we've been working off Dick Anderson's estimate of construction costs, and now they've actually bid all the work that will be subbed out, and they come back with significantly higher costs. I think they're as surprised as anybody that the costs are much higher. But it looks now like we are it's going to cost us $770,000 per unit to deliver those units rather than $600,000 per unit. It's across the board in terms of cost. We met with the potential tenant yesterday to talk about the cost increases. We had a very good discussion. We gave them the range of rental rates where we think it needs to be within the range that's mentioned down below. They didn't throw anything at us or cuss us out, and they continued to talk about the project all the way through the end of the meeting. In fact, their needs, their internal business needs, have actually escalated the need for the project. They need it worse than they did when we started talking to them. And so, and as they said, there just isn't an alternative in the market. I mean, there's nothing in Great Falls that offers the combination of available facilities with that high bay open floor plan and the potential to expand that we can offer. And that potential to expand is really worth something to them as they look ahead to their future business projections. They want the ability to add more units in there. And so I think, the culmination of all that plus that zoning, that flexible zoning is key to them. As I've explained before, they need a retail presence. They actually need the public to come in. That is increasingly a problem for them. They need to direct sell, to the public. And there aren't a lot of sites where you can combine that zoning that would allow a retail presence with light industrial, in a floor plan that accommodates everything in one area, which is really important to them. And so I thought we had a really good discussion yesterday. They're going to discuss it amongst the group of owners, and we're kind of targeting the first or second week of January to kind of get figured out what we want to do. We need to get those units bought in that time frame in order to ensure that we're going to have a building done. They're aware of all the pressures we have. The city development agreement requires we have units done by next December. They're aware of that. Dick Anderson's very aware of that. They're very accommodating with that. But we're going to need to pull the trigger relatively soon in order to get 5 units in rather than 3. And so I think we're all on target for that date. We've already sent the draft lease over to them that the board approved last month. And so now we want to revise both the cost and the rental rate structure slightly. We're still targeting a 7.5% cap rate on these, which I think everyone agrees is fair. Dick Anderson's rate falls within that same range. They agree that's a fair return. One of the good things that having this close relationship with the tenant is we're going to be able to sit down and go through the plan set and see what things they may not need. Like just yesterday, I learned that they're going to use electric forklifts. That might help us to the tune of $75,000 with an air evacuation system, because if they're not using propane or gas powered inside the building, we may not have to vent it for auto emissions. So that would be a big deal. They were already planning that, even though when I was at their site, I saw some propane equipment, and so they're already planning that. So that's a good cost savings. And what we told them is, it's open book development. I mean, we're going to sit down with you and tell you what our costs are, and if we can find ways to pull things out of it that don't hamper the long-term marketability of the building. I mean, obviously, we don't want to change the building such that we could never accommodate someone else, or punt costs down the road that we would have later. But things like that, we might be able to accommodate those types of changes to allow for cost savings in the project that could bring the rental rate down, bring cost of construction down and the rental rate down. So we've yet to do that exercise. That's what we'll be doing in the next few weeks as we move towards making a decision. But I'm hopeful in January, we would have things pretty much underway with a lease and a decision to move forward and all those things following a decision here. And so what we're asking for is to increase the overall project costs. We'd like to build 2 units for either 1.54 million or 3 units for 2.31 million, depending on whether or not we get a lease with the potential tenant. And then we want to revise the rental structure up a little bit from what the board approved last month to accommodate the higher rental rate. And so we think right now we're right around $22.50 per square foot, and that's a substantial rate. But there just isn't any industrial space in our community. Our hope is as we go along, we'll be able to deliver units less expensively, in the future that will help us draw that rental rate down some. Part of it is right now there just is a lot of demand for construction in our community. There's not much labor, so maybe some of that's temporary as things cool off a little bit. Maybe that labor cost comes down a little bit. Materials costs are still escalated, particularly like metal paneling and that kind of thing is still escalated. Some of the other building materials are coming down. If you go to Home Depot now and look at the price of a 2x4, it's cheaper than it was a year ago. So some of that stuff is cooling. So we're hopeful that moving forward we can get that rental rate below 20 eventually. But frankly, this is just the cost of delivering these units right now.
Yeah, I left 2 weeks ago and the gas was $3.10 a gallon. I came back and it's $2.84.
And that's going to help all the commodities, if it stays there. And that'll help all the commodities.
Exactly.
Unemployment's supposed to go up next year according to Powell, so there should be more people to work.
But now you're definitely hearing about softening of the recession, though. I mean,
Something of the inflation.
Well, they're saying, it's going to be a big bad recession. Now
yeah.
people are saying mild recession. The problem is if there's not a bunch of pink slips, you don't ever get to reset the labor cost. You really need a pretty good sized walloping to reset those labor costs.
That's assuming the Fed will pivot, and a lot of people say they probably won't, because they're bound to determine to bring inflation under control, and that would drive the recession to much severe.
Right. And the other thing you're hearing too for the first time, which I think I've been saying since the onset, is potentially welfare reform. The other part of this is the productivity rate is like at a 30-year low, and then on top of that, participation rate's like at a 30-year low. There's too much government funds slopping around in there, for folks that aren't in the workforce. And so that needs to dry up some to force some of that labor back into the workforce. So we'll see. Sorry about that.
Oh, who is that?
It's my kid.
You need to take it as an
No.
emergency situation. All right. She doesn't know there's a meeting going on?
Apparently not.
Okay.
Speakerphone, we could all say hi.
Yeah.
Exactly. The one question, so the $770 per unit that you're wanting to go up to? Do you think that is a cap with the information that we have right now, with all of the options in it, and then when they start negotiating what they really need, that number may come down?
It may come down. I think what's likely to happen is, some of the, like for instance, this tenant doesn't need all the doors. Because I mean, what we would normally build would be doors on both sides on every 30-foot bay. This tenant doesn't need that many doors. We do that because, at some point in the future, we might subdivide those and everyone needs a door, but they don't need that many. Those doors are one of the highest cost escalators, right now in all of building materials. Even the doors out back are very hard to get. The littler doors we have out back have been very hard to get. And so, punting the doors down the road makes sense, and they're easy to put back in later because we just have a big sheet metal wall. So we're going to frame it out, and then we can put a door in there later. And so those are the kinds of things. And I think what will likely happen is the costs are likely to come down some, but then some of that will likely be replaced with things they want. Like, hey, could I have a bigger water line here, or could I have a bigger water line there? So my guess is we probably still end up in that same rental cost range. It'll just be more slightly customized to what they want. And so, that'll be a discussion. We talked about it yesterday with Dick Anderson of, some of these things, like, hey, I need a bigger water line. That doesn't hurt the development any. And if we're making a return on investment on it, it doesn't hurt us any to do it. It'll just cost a little bit more, and they're willing to pay a little bit more. Some of that stuff I think we'll probably be willing to do. So my guess would be we'll cut enough out of that project to fund most of the stuff they want. In there, like they may want a drywalled office in one area. In fact, I know they want that. They might want one bay kind of drywalled off. Well, providing that to them, at a cost we're recovering makes sense, and probably other people want that anyway. It makes sense to do it. It's just, we'll take that from not building doors, kind of thing.
But at this time, in those 5 units, they're not planning a retail space?
No, they will have it.
Oh, they'll have retail even in these 5?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
their idea is to have a direct-to-customer, location right in there where people can come in. And so, we talked about that yesterday and kind of what they're envisioning for that, and and so I think it'll probably be right in there.
So with the size of the current pad that's being built with roads on both ends, how many total units could we put in there?
And that's a good discussion too. We've been talking about it with Dick Anderson because the first building, the land starts to drop off. If you go down by the jail, where we have that big dirt mound, the land starts to drop off. So it probably makes sense to kind of stop at 8 or 10 units on the first building, because then development costs go up to fill that in. And so my thinking would be, maybe we start these first 5 and we leave that building alone, and then we go to the next building over. The pavement's already in for the next building over. The parking or the truck bays and everything are in. So we can leapfrog, go over to the second building, start development down that, and that leaves the first business building potential to expand down the road. Plus, as the market value of these units escalate, that'll make it easier for us to deal with the cost of filling in that hole. So 10 years from now, when we're out of spots to continue building, we can come back and finish that building, and the economics should be such that makes a better deal. Plus, we generate dirt. Geez, Rod, every year practically. Every time we touch anything, we generate a crap load of dirt. So we can start designating that as the site to drop that dirt, and so we could just start dropping dirt. A lot of times we have to pay to have it hauled off because we don't have anywhere we can put it. Let's say in the airfield, when you're out there, the critical surfaces don't let you just pile it. And so a lot of times we have to have it hauled off. And so rather than have it hauled off, we'll just have it dumped over there so we can continue to level that site over time. So that's kind of the plan is, as Dick Anderson and us have talked, we've kind of said, yeah, maybe we'll build those 5 and then just let that building hang out and flip over to the next one, start development down through there, and leave those units in case they want to expand, or until the economics improve so that we can do that less expensively.
And just to make sure my brain orientation is right, the 5 units would be at length, and they'll be perpendicular to the frontage road, right? So the units going like this compared to the frontage road.
Exactly.
And then the next build you're talking is more towards the south,
South.
towards Elm.
Exactly, yeah, so
So these would be the closest to
the jail.
To the jail.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and we might decide too, this particular tenant, may eventually need some laydown area. We might take that low area rather than building buildings. Maybe the airport would take that low area and build a laydown yard in there. Because then it can be, you can have a grade differential and just build a gravel road down into it for the tenants that need laydown. That might be a more economic thing that we can make money off of. I mean, we're doing quite well in the Ashley, furniture location, which is old millings from the last paving project we had, that we slapped out in the middle of the field, and now we rent it. And so that might be another option that we could pursue is, we'll land bank that land for quite a while just by allowing storage down there for the tenants in the development, and then make income off of that. So there's a lot of things we can do to kind of preserve that market, that expansion opportunity for that first tenant. That probably makes sense, because the next buildings over don't have that grade drop off, so they can accommodate 13 units. So building 2, building 3, those could be 13 units long, which is over 30,000 square feet. So, probably makes sense to go ahead and move on to the next building, and leave that one alone. But of course, that'll be a decision, down the road, because the idea now is if we get the 5 units built, they'll all be leased from the beginning, so we'll have to see when the next round of interested parties come in, or potentially if Dick Anderson wants to start on the second building in a year or two.
Right.
That'll be kind of a decision will have to be made, down the road.
Excellent.
Just something quick, Jake, you mentioned before the meeting briefly that you're fielding a lot of calls about these. Is there anything specific that is interesting about the calls you're getting, or?
Yeah, not specifically for these bays, but for industrial spaces that can take advantage of the zoning and are available for industrial, like they're really good size, or the increments of size that you're offering are consistent with the types of RFIs that we field from the state. And a few local companies who need the space, but as you know, the developed spaces that are already zoned appropriately are either highly specialized, significantly larger, or unavailable. So, we get. I'm Jake from GFIAA, by the way. We get a few phone calls that this project would be relevant to every month at least.
Optimistic.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say too is, we strongly feel, and I think the development committee of the board that we met with strongly feel that this is the right tenant. This sets a tone for the development. I think similar users will look at that, positively. I think, it brings a retail presence to the airport land that will help people think about the land differently. As a place where you're actually coming to do some commerce. Most people don't have any real business unless they drop off a FedEx package. But this will really bring a lot of people up here to conduct business, and I think that'll be key because it'll really make it seem closer to the community. I'm always surprised. We go, way up there on the hill. I'm like, way up? It's literally 2 minutes from the golf course. But you hear that a lot. The people think of us as outside of town, and I think this will really help combat that in a way. As people come up here and interact with this development, I think it'll really change some of those perceptions. I think it could attract similar users that do similar things, and really sets a tone and tenor for this development. Plus, it helps us with some home run developments we're kind of working on. They're real speculative, but if we got something in the field that we're working on, it would be a big deal for the community and for getting that land developed. And so, I just think this tenant does a lot to kind of move the entire development forward.
So what are the dimensions of the building?
Each unit will be 30 by 80, so the width of the building is 80 feet. And so as you add 30 increment slugs, that's basically where the rib is. So you're going 30-foot ribs And then the bay, you can subdivide each one of those bays, so we could build a drywall wall in between the bay, and you could even divide that in half and have a single 40 by 30, for a very small, like maybe a mom and pop welding shop, might want something like that. And then you could have a big door on it, so you could get practically anything in there to do work. Or you can get a 30 by 80, which means you would have the double across, and you could have drive-through. If your business is, say it's industrial coatings or something where you're doing some kind of coating on, specialized coating on equipment, you could drive in, drive out type of thing. There's one of those in the Bozeman development where the guy applies specialized coatings to, I think vehicles. Or you can take the entire length of the building, which like I said before, the 13 bay ones would be just over 30,000 square foot. So we can build an entire, 30 by 80. And we can adjust that. I mean, if a tenant comes in and says, hey, I really want to be 100, it's just a matter of having the engineering redone just to carry that load. We've bought the plan set for 30 by 80. We own that. We can rebuild it as many times as we want.
How tall?
22 foot is the
24 foot.
lowest protrusion. The door height is 18.
No, it's,
Are they bigger or smaller than snow removal?
it's
almost
about the
exactly
same size.
It
Yeah.
looks like the snow removal building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sidewalls are 24 and the peak is 30, around 30.
Right, and then the lowest sprinkler head.
Yeah, the
whatever,
doors up there are 20 feet tall.
20 feet. I thought these doors were only 18.
I think we're doing 14 by 20s, or, yeah, 14 by 20 on the new building. Ours are like 26 by 20 up there, which is
Yeah.
big.
And so for that 770, that includes radiant heat. So you'd have a heater running down the length. You're hooked to an oil water separator, all from the get-go. You can have welding power. We can have power to have welding power in each unit. I mean, they're industrial built. I mean, they're ready to.
You got in-floor drains to drop the water.
Everything sheds like our snow building. Everything sheds to the outside, and then there's trench drain on both doors. So you'll shed to the outsides and drains out. Now, we drop an incredible amount of snow on that floor every year, and it gets out of there pretty quick, with that design. So.
And after these initial ones are built, there's no restrictions, like they don't have
Ooh.
to be.
What, you hit the building?
No, I think they're putting that,
Yeah,
the jumpy thing that,
Lord.
yeah.
party going on.
After these initial buildings, the requirement that they have to be manufacturing goes away, and we're pretty free in what we can do as long as it's within.
No, I mean, we'll always have the requirement, this is primarily supposed to be industrial space. So I mean, we'll always have that requirement. The development that's in the development agreement calls for 3 units. And then eventually we plan to build 3 buildings. But I mean, over time, the idea is you're creating space for industrial users. And that's what we're doing. I mean, we have this industrial user on the hook now. As future development goes on over there, it can be other things. But we want to have, these kind of first 3 buildings that are kind of for industrial users. If we build it and there isn't an industrial user, there's nothing that says we can't rent it to someone else. Or if we have somebody that comes in there, like this first user wants multiple uses, we can, it allows for that too. But yeah, it's intended to be an industrial development. We certainly want to, maintain that spirit of development. I mean, over time, I'm sure there'll be some folks in there that aren't doing, heavy industrial stuff. But yeah.
Storing their big motorhomes.
Then we may have some of that, and in there too. So.
There is no indoor storage for large RVs in town.
I know, especially if you want to heat it. It used to be you could put them in the unheated in the fairgrounds. I don't know if they're even doing that anymore. They used to pile that place full.
But I mean, the encouraging thing is that, this first user is exactly what we thought we would get, which is a manufacturer that needs some flexible space. And every time we need it, it becomes more apparent that we're building the right product.
do you have a commitment yet?
No, no.
Okay, so we keep talking about this first tenant, and we keep throwing these bones out. As a sales manager, show me the money.
Right, yeah.
Well, what he's hoping to have next month this time.
I mean, you know how many times I hear that from my guys? I mean, I'm so close. I'm so close. I'm so
Sell
close.
that piece of equipment tomorrow.
And that's what we've said, that's why this is set up the way it is. We need to build the first two, because we could stop, but if we stop, then that TIF expires in October, and we never get reimbursed the 1.1 million. It seems money ahead to me at a minimum, and Dick Anderson and us talked about this yesterday, and they're very committed to building their unit also. We need to move ahead with the 3 in order to get the 1.1 million, in, and get the first units up and going so that we have something to lease and sell. Once we get units in the ground, it really gives us something we can sell. I mean, right now we're selling an idea and kind of cartoon drawing, and so that's the big advantage of having this first tenant. If we can immediately go 5 units and have them leased up, it really is a proof of concept for the entire development.
Well, that's the question that popped up in my head while we're looking at, if we are building with expansion in mind, either 3 units with no tenant yet, or 5 units fully utilized. You and Dick Anderson talked at all about maybe building 1 or 2 more that would potentially be open and available that could have that exact same thing, proof of concept. Hey, here's one ready for you right now. You want to move in 5 months?
We really haven't, and part of the reason for that is right now we have to pursue dual track. So Josh at Dick Anderson is still pursuing building the 3 units until we can get something nailed down to build the 5. So right now we've got to kind of go pale-mail on 3 to ensure we keep the sub pricing and keep our place in line at Nucor. Because if we give up our place, then we're back to the end of the line of who gets metal when. Right now he's hanging on to those 3 units in the Nucor production line so that we can have steel on the ground this spring. So we're not looking beyond the 5. First of all, because in a sense, we're going to be out of cash. As I've told Josh, I said, well, if we're going to immediately own 3 to lease, I got to pause, because that's as much as I'm willing to put in at the entry stage. They may proceed, with more units. So kind of the next ante is up to them of, okay, this is working out well. We've already leased all of our units. Cash flow is coming in. Let's proceed with more units. Otherwise we may, we gotta kind of let the dust settle, see where that 8.6 million is, and then decide if we want to invest in more units as an investor. The whole goal of this is to have some of them sell so that it's, immediate turnover of units. And so, we begin generating land rent, so we want as many units going out as possible. We assume that it would be primarily owners, not leasers. And so kind of we're getting off on leasing, which Dick Anderson's perfectly comfortable with. They do that elsewhere. We're more reticent of a landlord because we don't have a lot of capital we can just continue to pile in. So I think we got to get the 5 in and let the dust settle for a couple years, see where our cash flow is, and then come back to the board and say, okay, this has worked well. We're now getting a couple $100,000 a year, in new income. Let's consider putting some reserves into action and getting some more units. And plus, one of the nice things is, we need this kind of building for our operations. So, if we always kind of stay a little bit behind on storage, we've got some demand that we can be using, one of these buildings ourselves, rather than paying for the exact same type of expansion on the snow building. So that's kind of nice too, is, we're a customer of this product too. So, we can kind of delay that snow building a little bit and build over here instead.
Good. Okay, with that, do I have a motion to authorize the airport director to increase allowable cost of the condo units from $600,000 to $770,000 per unit, 2 units $1.54 million and 3 units $2.31 million, and also increase or change the terms of the lease agreement as stated on the page? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion, comments, or questions?
Somewhere in the motion there was the caveat of, he's got to get the deal signed before we go to the 2.4.
Correct. Let me rephrase that part. With acquisition of the third unit contingent on successful negotiation of the lease terms for the prospective client. Thank you.
That's already there from the last meeting.
Oh, well, now it's back to, we're good. All right, so I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Very good questions and answers so far.
What if, I'm going on the belief that we're going, when we do ink a deal, because I'm confident you will, it will not have the escape, and we commit the 2.5 million, there won't be an easy escape clause for our leasing.
No, I mean, I think it's somebody we would all trust to do, the right thing there. And, I mean, obviously anyone can go bankrupt or defraud you, but, this isn't the tenant I would expect that out of. I think they'll, do what the contract says without, us having to, pursue them or anything. I think, once they say they're coming, I mean, they need it, and they would be the first to tell you that, and there aren't a lot of other options, and so it'll be an important decision for their business, and I think once they say they're doing it, and we can get them to sign on the line, I'm confident they'll follow through.
And we're looking at 5 years from the shoulders, right?
I think probably we're going to ask for 10. We've kind of left that to Dick Anderson to say okay, what are you guys comfortable with for the private equity side? And they're I think going to move towards 10. And so the one reason we were interested in kind of shorter term lease is I think ultimately this tenant would like to build a big building in the development eventually, and that may still be in their mind. That hey, maybe a few years down the road, we might want to build, because initially when we started talking to them, they thought they could fit in 3 units. And so they were saying, well, yeah, we might like to have that on a short-term lease. As we got involved with the architect and laid out their development, it became clear they needed more units. And so now we're up to 5. And so I think to get up to the 5 units, we're going to want probably a 10-year lease.
Early termination clause.
There probably won't be, and what I've said, and I think Dick Anderson's in line with this, is beyond the first 5 years, if they want to move into a custom building, we ought to have an escape clause in there that we would say, okay, we'll work with you to make that happen because it's in our best interest too. I mean, getting a couple units back rather than building more units and then getting the entire building sold, that's also in our best interest because it would be like a 30,000 square foot
But I
building.
still think they may not build on our land, because what if his business?
It'd be restricted to our land, otherwise
His business gets bought by a bigger business.
Right.
And he looks for money, and they don't want to be here, and they want to move to wherever they're at.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The provision that would be in there would be that if you're going to build a bigger building in our development, then we would have a parachute clause, to get you out of that. Just so we all remember that, because who knows, 5 years I may not be here, or Laura, who knows what will happen. But once we get a fusion reactor flying personal cars, they may not need us.
Hey, right now they say this only makes enough fusion for 2 coffee pots, so we got some work to do. Coffee pots. It's a very small reaction. Oh my goodness.
The only reason that because that industry is very common for
Yeah.
folks getting bought up right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Every industry.
Yeah, and the lease would go with, them, and I mean, they'd have to settle the lease, and,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, the reason I like the idea of an escape is for them to build a bigger building, because if they want to take down an entire 30,000 square foot building, we want to have a way to do that.
So Anderson's lease and our lease will be
Yep.
mirror each other.
Yeah, they're actually going to use the same lease, so you sent them that last month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got that. We agreed on rental terms last week that, where the rental rate needed to be. We came about it 2 completely different ways and ended up pretty much the same spot, so I think we were about a quarter off.
25 cents or a quarter of the rent.
25 cents different on rent, and so we kind of looked through that. I think I think it's a good deal for everybody if we can get it done, kind of what the terms we have right here.
And just to make sure, before the vote comes out, just to make sure that there is no question, if there are any agenda items present that conflict or have a conflict of interest and require a member to abstain from the vote, please so acknowledge. All right, and that is none. So, all in favor of recommending the warehouse condo cost revision as previously primary and seconded, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, continue on. All right, finally, any airport authority board additional comments? Let's see. Commissioner Hoban.
No.
Commissioner Gibbs.
No.
Commissioner Timbo. Commissioner Aaron's.
No, sir.
Commissioner Alon.
Sir?
I have no further comments, and any additional airport authority comments?
Just like to thank Commissioner Bakke for a great run, and it's been an amazing 6 years. I think we've gotten a lot accomplished. We've set the table for, for some pretty terrific things going forward, and I'm pretty excited about it. Appreciate your help in doing it, and hopefully you'll stay in touch with us and be pushing on the back end for that 747.
Exactly. Well, you can always look for me out the window pushing smoke as I go fly by in my little airplane.
I really appreciate all you've done.
Appreciate it. It's been fun, and I learned a lot about the whole thing. I'll still be around. Some people never leave, Commissioner Hogan. We leave for a little while, then we come back because we just can't stay away. Excellent. All right, and we have no work meeting, so with no further business come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. What time's the party?
4:30.
It's 4:22.
Anytime now.
It's 4:22.
They're ready for you.
When we go get our peoples and we'll be back at 5.
Yeah. And next time, we gotta move the meeting back another half an hour, because I was trying to give you half an hour for that. But just be ready for the white elephant.
Well, it might be for the next, guy that doesn't talk nearly as long. You knew better than that with me. All right, we'll see you guys back here in about 5 o'clock.
If you want to leave.
You know, it stops on the way here.
Yeah, we'll come, we'll just come.